Then, yeah, welcome back to the second session of today's webinar. In this second session, I will focus a little more on fast DNA RNA extraction itself and the use in point-of-care diagnostics. And we'll talk about what is this point-of-care diagnostics in itself. So, first of all, I started with a little recap from the first session, the how to enable fast extraction of nucleic acids. Again, we have this 4 steps procedure, the cell lysis, which provides the disruption of cells and so the release of nucleic acids. How is that done in fast nucleic acid extraction methods? So either these fast methods are applied only to so-called easy targets, or that's what I named it. And easy in this respect is for me cells that are easy to disrupt, like virus particles or human animal cells usually, or also gram-negative bacteria. There you don't have to apply very harsh methods to crack these cells to get hold of the DNA or RNA. Second, simple way to expand the portfolio of targets that you can address with the fast nucleic acid extraction would be to apply heat. Because you don't need an extra instrument, for example, an expensive bead beater or something like that. And by the way, how fast extraction is done, you also cannot apply the chemical methods mostly, at least not adding alcohol and not adding chaotropic salts, because once you introduce those chemicals into the extraction process, you mostly can't get rid of them anymore, and they will for sure inhibit your PCR assay afterwards. That's why heat extraction is one of the easiest way to also address not so easy targets like gram-positive bacteria or even fungi. The nucleic acid inactivation I mentioned is important. Otherwise, you would see a certain degradation of DNA and RNA by the enzymes. So the strategy for fast nucleic acid extraction here is, again, either use, let's call it inactive specimens. And so these are specimens with a low DNase and RNase activity, like, for example, buccal swabs or nasal swabs or skin, urine. Those are samples that have inherently not so high DNase or let's say nuclease activity. So an opposite type of sample would be, for example, blood plasma. It's very rich in nucleases. If you don't take care of this, then all your free DNA RNA would be easily degraded. So second strategy to deal with this nuclease inactivation is the addition of proteases. That's our point B here. Of course, these proteases would degrade the nucleases and by that inactivate them very efficiently. If you think about later, of course, you also have to then deal with these proteases, because if they are still active and you get with your sample into the PCR, then they will also degrade your Taq polymerase. So that's why it's mostly coupled within heat extraction. Heat itself would inactivate DNase, and if you use protease in addition, then it would also inactivate the protease after it has done its job. Third step is this nucleic acid purification, the removal of everything else but nucleic acids. I mentioned it in the first webinar, in the first session, that you, with fast nucleic acid extraction methods, you usually would not do an actual purification in terms of binding nucleic acids to a solid support and washing everything else off and then eluting the nucleic acids from this solid support. In contrast, you would do what I always call reverse purification. So that means you try to deplete or sequester all these compounds that are not nucleic acids, and by that bring them below a critical threshold of this inhibitor concentration. And how this is done, I introduced in the first slide deck, but we'll go into the details again on the next slide. And yeah, nucleic acid extraction is mostly not possible with the fast extraction methods because we don't have this DNA binding and then wash elute. But mostly you have a direct extraction. You apply certain chemicals or conditions, and with this lysate, you go into the subsequent analysis. So let's look into this reverse purification part a little more. The left half of this table you already know from my first slide deck from the first session. And I would like to go through all of them again and especially also talk about the advantages and disadvantages. So let me use a laser pointer. So if you are about or talking about the centrifugation before lysis, the smart thing about this is that you concentrate your cells, which you are interested in, where you want to extract your nucleic acids from. You pellet this and you remove all the supernatant. And by that, of course, all the inhibitors that are in this supernatant. So that's very efficient. And you have this additional concentration of the target cells because the cell pellet you can resuspend in a very small volume, which is usually much smaller than the initial sample volume. The disadvantage of that is you need a centrifuge. So especially if you think about point-of-care diagnostics or applying these methods in laboratories or even not labs, but other places, mostly there's no centrifuge or you don't want to use a centrifuge there. So if you do this second method here, the centrifugation after lysis, then you would need to make sure that your the stuff that you can remove with the centrifugation is somehow precipitated or is, for example, the cell debris, which is the remainder of the cells without the nucleic acids, which has been released by the cell lysis. Advantage, it works also quite well, provided that these components are precipitable. Also you must be able to spin them down. And the disadvantage, again, is, of course, the need for a centrifuge. Another quite nice method is the gel filtration. This works on removal of low molecular weight compounds. If you see here the legend, I have written down what I mean with that. It's basically all compounds that have a very small molecular weight and so molecule size. I usually set the cutoff at around 10 kilodalton. So low molecular weight compounds include salt ions, include nucleotides or oligonucleotides, so short nucleic acid fragments. Yeah, those kind of things, all small compounds. So advantage, it's very fast and efficient, absolutely. Disadvantage is the procedure itself is quite error prone because first of all, you need a centrifuge. There's another disadvantage. And then you have to very carefully apply your sample onto this kind of column. It's a mini spin column, if you want. And you have to be very careful to apply the sample so that it really goes through all the resin. And by that, it can only efficiently remove the low molecular weight compounds. Another disadvantage is that you cannot remove high molecular weight compounds. If you look here, what I mean with this is proteins and carbohydrates and also glycoproteins. So all these larger molecules cannot be removed by the gel filtration. The addition of PVP is particularly used for removal of phenolic compounds. In fact, it's not the real removal like in the three methods before, but it's a kind of scavenging because this PVP is a huge also a high molecular weight compound, a polymer, and it has the property that it can bind phenolic compounds and so make sure it doesn't interact with other other workflows anymore. Like, for example, the phenols would not interact with the Taq polymerase or with the DNA. And by that, it wouldn't disturb the PCR afterwards. So big advantage is you just need a buffer with the PVP and you don't have to take care of any extra work steps. The disadvantage is you still don't get rid of everything else but phenolic compounds. The addition of Helix 100, this is an ion exchange resin, is you can also scavenge divalent cations like magnesium or copper or other things, but divalent cations, again, you basically don't have any extra work steps, but it's very specific to these ions that can be removed by that. Nothing else can be removed with it. So that's the disadvantage, obviously. Then there is the addition of certain beads with a certain coating, which is also part of our products. By that, you can remove cell debris and most of the high molecular weight compounds. So these beads bind proteins and carbohydrates. So they don't bind nucleic acids, but the impurities. That's why it's a reverse purification again. The advantage is you can operate without centrifuge. You just need a magnetic stand. It's a very easy operation. And you will see later, it's nice that you can use these beads also for an additional cell capturing functionality, which provides you some additional value. The disadvantage of that method is it is not usable for removing low molecular weight compounds. So these beads cannot be used for remove high salt concentrations or short DNA fragments, those kind of things. And the most simple way of treating your nucleic acid extract is to dilute it. That would lower the concentration of everything in this extract, means of your nucleic acids, but also of all your impurities. It's very easy to perform, obviously. However, you not dilute the impurities, not speaking about removal at all, but you also dilute analytes, so your DNA or your RNA, which you actually want to detect afterwards. So if you have an application where you have very low DNA concentration to detect, because there is only a little bit, say a little cells or whatever, a very little amount of analytes in your sample, then you should not dilute the sample any further, because that would obviously negatively impact your assay sensitivity. So what are the actual contributors to the increasing popularity of these purification-free or direct extraction methods? So first of all, it's you see a very long-term trend over the last more than 20 years of increasing publications, so increasing interests about point-of-care diagnostics, point-of-care testing. That table here shows you the number of articles published in PubMed per year. So you see a very nice trend since the 1990s, basically going up to, in 2022, that was the last data point. We had more than 5,000 publications that somehow were about point-of-care testing. And the second important contributor is the COVID crisis that we had the last 2 years, because what the laboratories saw there is a severe shortage in RNA extraction kits. Was even more severe than the shortage in PCR assays. Yeah, so you have hundreds of PCR assay providers. All companies launched their COVID testing kits, but you hardly had enough extraction kits on the market for do all these millions and billions even of extractions. And that's why people came up with very short methods, sometimes even without any extraction. You just add your sample into the PCR reaction. And you can imagine that can even work because if you think about the stuff I showed you before, saliva or nasal swabs, which is the preferred specimen for this, are one of those easy specimens, not rich in nucleases and viruses. SARS-CoV-2 is also an easy target. It's very easy to break up SARS-CoV-2 virus particles. So that was really a nice example how on a mass scale you can apply fast and direct DNA extraction for molecular diagnostics. And that shows you again, just one more time, that in many cases, it's actually not necessary to have highly purified nucleic acids to run your assay afterwards. But what still is important that you have to take care, you have to know what is your specimen, what inhibitors do I have in the specimen, and how can I deplete them. Usually you use one of these reverse purification methods, which I just showed you before. And then you are ready to go apply this faster and easier way of extraction, and that is still sufficient for your assay. So I talked a lot about point-of-care diagnostic or point-of-care testing, but what actually is this point-of-care testing? If you look into Wikipedia, you see the definition that point-of-care testing is defined as medical diagnostic testing at or near the patient care. So in most of the Western world, the high-income countries, that would mean you do a diagnostic test at the bedside or in a doctor's office, which usually doesn't have a big lab or any lab at all, or even at home. For low middle-income countries, that might also mean testing in laboratories of small hospitals or regional health centers. In all these cases, you face some challenges because the infrastructure is not optimal for performing nucleic acid testing. And usually you have untrained personnel or even normal people like you and me who, or maybe not you and me, but other people who are not involved in molecular biology, they have no idea how to extract a sample or to perform a diagnostic test. So these are the challenges you face in point-of-care testing in general. Now, it's also interesting to see that point-of-care testing is much, much more than just the nucleic acid-based detection methods that most of you might have in mind. But point-of-care testing is, for example, also looking into biochemistry or into other markers. So I grouped them here according to the 4 different technologies used. Let me use the laser pointer again. So one big point is the biochemistry, electrochemistry. Point-of-care tests in that or using this technologies are coagulation testing or blood electrolytes, blood gases. Also blood glucose, simple diabetes tests are working with this. And also these urine sticks are mostly working on biochemical effects. Another category is optical cell counting. There are instruments out there which can do a CD4 cell count, for example, for HIV infections or to monitor HIV infections, or just doing a simple complete blood count, CBC. There are also point-of-care instruments out there already. Another very important and big section is immunological based detection. So it's all the methods that employ an antibody-antigen interaction to detect certain things like infectious diseases, like cancer markers, cardiac markers, or pregnancy testing. The simple pregnancy test you can buy is also based on immunological methods. And also all these billions of SARS-CoV-2 tests that are around there, this rapid tests, is all immunological testing. And the last, the 4th category is the actual nucleic acid detection. in point-of-care space, you mostly see tests looking for infectious diseases. So, and this last part is the one we look a little more into the details now. So this molecular diagnostic point-of-care testing, there are several modes how you can achieve this. First of all is, of course, the most convenient way, fully integrated systems. You give a sample into this point-of-care system. It will extract the nucleic acid, will amplify the nucleic acid, and also detect and give you a result afterwards. But there are also instruments or methods out there where you have a separate extraction, and the point-of-care testing device, the commercial one, is, for example, only looking for amplification detection. Or also possible, if you usually talk about things that are developed in academic research, then people would have you can also have an extraction part, an amplification part, and maybe a separated detection part. So what are the advantages and the limitations of these different categories? So fully integrated systems, obviously the most intriguing advantage is that you don't have any manual handling. You don't need to deal with the extraction, with the amplification. You do not need to pipette anything. You just put your sample in and you get the result out. So you also cannot do any errors or introduce any errors in the analysis. The limitations, however, are those methods or these instruments are usually quite expensive, and the test cartridges are also on the more higher price range. Which is also very important is that you have no flexibility. You are completely dependent on the instrument provider, the cartridge provider. Whatever they have as assays and defined as the appropriate specimens, you have to go with. You cannot do any other assay with these instruments. And often you see also a limitation in the sample input volume. Mostly these fully integrated systems have some or are not so good in processing larger sample volumes. If this is needed, for example, because you want to detect, let's say, STI infectious agents from urine, you cannot usually introduce 1 milliliter of urine or even more into the detection with those fully integrated systems. And so, of course, you lose assay sensitivity. And this is then, in turn, the most advantages of this modulated or modular way of analyzing things. You have a high flexibility because if you, for example, have just a qPCR device, a mobile device, very small, not much energy use, you can develop your own assay for it, and you are basically controlling how the assay works. You are controlling what you want to use as a specimen and just have to choose the right extraction method. So you have a very high flexibility. Mostly this way of analysis is also more affordable. But as usual, you also have some limitations, and the limitation here is you have to have some manual handling throughout the analysis procedure. So that means you cannot give this into the hands of any untrained person, but you have to provide a certain training, or you have to run this assays in the hands of people that are trained by education, for example. And since you have manual handling, you also have a higher chance for user errors. So, but in all these cases, what you always see is the extraction is the most neglected part of diagnostic assays. You see so many publications on having nice assays for disease detection, but what you always often see is that the extraction part is not mentioned really, or is not taken care of appropriately in those publications. But the true thing is that it is can be the most challenging one, especially if you talk about specimens like stool samples or whole blood, or even in urine you have high concentration of inhibitory substances. And that is also the reason why most systems, especially fully integrated systems, very often only are designed for easy specimens like those swabs or saliva or very small amounts of blood, and also often only detect easy to lyse targets, because it's of course hard to implement one of those hard cell lysis methods which I showed you in the beginning of this session. And I mentioned before this silica-based purification is the most popular, most often used one. But if you look at this, at the workflow that is applied to perform this silica-based extraction, you see it's very lengthy. You have a lot of step, you have a lot of chemicals, a lot of interaction, and still the advantage is, of course, you get very highly pure nucleic acids, which is nice. But the limitation is you have a lot of steps, and mostly it's too many. It also often takes more time than a direct extraction approach. And which is also not to be underestimated, is the use of lots of hazardous substances like these chaotropic salts, like the alcohols. All these are not so nice chemicals you want to work with if you have to do it manually or if you have to do it outside of a lab. So in contrast, what are the advantages and limitations of those fast DNA RNA extractions? Again, usually the advantage is, of course, maybe I unveil this. The advantage is you do not have hazardous substances like the chaotropic salts or alcohols. You often have much less work steps. The extraction time is usually much shorter because you have to work less through less work steps. And this is also a point that not many people know. You also have not the chance for loss of nucleic acids, because what happens if you do a proper silica-based extraction is that some of the nucleic acids you bind to the membrane or the beads, you cannot elute anymore. So if you have very low DNA or RNA concentrations in your original sample, then you will lose a significant amount of those DNA bound to the silica surface. You will not be able to elute it anymore, which of course then lowers your sensitivity. On the limitation side, this is basically also shown here. You usually don't have a target concentration possibility with a direct extraction. That's why it's these fast or direct extractions are not always applicable for testing when you want to test for very low DNA RNA amounts. Also samples which have a very high concentration of inhibitors, like whole blood. If you want to extract from, let's say, 200 microliter of whole blood, there's no way to do a direct extraction with it because you have so much hemoglobin in your sample afterwards. No PCR will work with it. The only thing you can do is work with a few microliter, do the extraction, and then go into the PCR assay. Then it might work depending on your master mix. But this is not suitable for doing, for example, infectious diseases, because you have your sample diluted so much you will not find your analyte anymore. Another limitation is that these fast extractions, because they do not provide a very pure nucleic acid, they give also certain variations which matter if you have a quantitative assay. If you, for example, want to quantify, I don't know, hepatitis B virus, for example, and you would do a fast extraction, then you would have certain varieties which might be larger than with a proper purification, DNA purification method. So those limitations you have to keep in mind, and you always have to judge and evaluate which of the advantages and which of the limitations matter more to you. As I said multiple times, still in many cases you can apply these direct extractions, but you always have to really think about it and make up your mind. So that is basically my last slide. I want to give you some more information about the two products that we have at Xpedite Diagnostics. Our extraction products are called SwiftX, and one product is the SwiftX DNA, the other is the SwiftX ParaBact. And if you think about this scheme of nucleic acid extraction, the cell lysis with our kits, we do it by applying heat. For the SwiftX DNA, there's also the option to use a protease that is beneficial if you want to lyse fungi or tissue samples. Then it's very nice. You get much higher extraction yields. And with the SwiftX ParaBact, it's basically also based on applying heat, but it's also under alkaline conditions, which gives you a very nice and high extraction efficiency if you talk about gram-positive bacteria and also parasites. The nucleic acid purification, or let's say reverse purification, we do with these magnetic beads that bind the cell debris and proteins and carbohydrates, so all these high molecular weight compounds. And the smart feature in our products is that we can use, by switching the buffer, can use the same beads which are used for the reverse purification. We can use them upfront for capturing of various cells, like epithelial cells, white blood cells, and also lots of different bacteria and parasites. So before you actually would lyse your sample, you capture the cells that you're interested in, get rid of all the inhibitors in your original sample, and then use these captured cells in a very small lysis buffer volume and perform your extraction and reverse purification. So the basic advantages of using these kits is you don't need any centrifuge. There are no hazardous chemicals like alcohols or guanidinium salts in there. With the heat lysis step supported by detergents, protease, or alkaline conditions, depending on the product, we have a very strong cell lysis, which is as strong as you would do mechanical lysis if you think about gram-positive bacteria. We have this reverse purification process, which is quite efficient, and overall, the whole workflow is quite short and much more convenient than a full-blown silica-based bind, wash, elute extraction. Well, with that, I'm at the end of my second session. I thank you again for your attention.